30 days, $88,000. Or I'm filing a lien and taking your property. That's the threat that landed on my kitchen table. On a Tuesday morning from an HOA I never joined for a ranch I bought at a county auction demanding money for rules I never agreed to follow. See, I'm Rex Dalton. I've been swinging hammers and fighting bureaucrats for 30 years. When I bought this 40-acre spread 6 months ago, it had been sitting empty for 3 years after the old farmer died. No HOA paperwork in sight, no mention of any association fees. But apparently, while I was fixing fences and clearing brush, some woman named Vivian decided my property belonged to her little kingdom. The smell of her designer perfume still lingered in my truck from when she'd visited to explain my obligations. What would you do if someone tried to steal your land with fake paperwork? Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I bet half of you have your own HOA horror stories. Because what this lady didn't know was that I don't back down from bullies and I definitely don't pay protection money. Let me back up and tell you how I ended up in this mess. My name's Rex Dalton. I'm 52 and I've spent most of my adult life building things with my hands and fixing problems other people create. After my divorce finalized last year, I decided it was time to invest in something solid, land that nobody could take away from me. Famous last words, right? That's when I found the Mitchell place at a county auction. 40 acres of prime Texas pasture, a 1970s farmhouse that needed some love, and 2 barns that had seen better days but still had good bones. The previous owner, Clarence Mitchell, had been an old-school rancher who'd worked this land for decades before passing away 2 years earlier. The morning I first walked that property, gravel crunched under my boots as I surveyed what would become my retirement project. The diesel smell from Clarence's old tractors still hung in the barn air, and morning mist rolled across the pastures like something out of a postcard. When the prairie wind caught those creaking barn doors, I knew I was home. At $180,000, I got it for about half its market value. Clarence had died intestate. That's lawyer speak. For no will, and his distant relatives couldn't afford the property taxes. Their loss was my gain, fair and square. My daughter Sage visits every other weekend, and she fell in love with the place immediately. "Dad, we could have horses," she said, already planning her sweet 16 party in the back pasture. For the first time since the divorce, I felt like I was building something that mattered. That piece lasted exactly 3 days. I was replacing rotted boards on the front porch when a pristine white BMW SUV came crunching up my gravel drive. Out stepped a woman who looked like she'd been assembled in a corporate boardroom. Perfectly coiffed blonde hair, designer clothes that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage, and a clipboard that seemed permanently attached to her manicured hand. "Mr. Dalton, I'm Vivian Harwick, president of the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association." She smiled, the kind of smile that sells million-dollar houses and forecloses on dreams. "We need to discuss your responsibilities as our newest member." I set down my hammer and wiped sawdust off my hands. "I'm sorry, what association?" There was no mention of any HOA in my purchase documents. Her smile got sharper, and I caught a whiff of her designer perfume, the kind that screams, "I make more in commissions than you make in a year." Oh, but there was an automatic inclusion when we expanded our boundaries in 2018. "Your property falls within our jurisdiction now." She handed me a folder thick enough to choke a horse. "There's a $2,400 initiation fee, plus $380 monthly dues. Retroactive, of course." See, what I didn't know yet was that Meadowbrook Estates was where the McMansion crowd lived. $2 million homes with manicured lawns and 3-car garages. And apparently, they decided us working ranch folks were bringing down their property values just by existing. "Ma'am, with respect, Clarence Mitchell never signed any of this." Mr. Mitchell's signature wasn't required. Her voice carried the dismissive tone reserved for people she considered beneath her social class. Property boundaries speak louder than individual consent. That's when Sage poked her head out the front door. "Dad, who's the lady with the car that costs more than our house?" From the mouths of babes. After Vivian left, I talked to my neighbors, Bobby Chun and Maria Santos, both ranch families facing the same pressure. Turned out this wasn't about community standards. This was about forcing us out so developers could turn our land into more subdivisions. She picked the wrong rancher. 2 weeks later, I got my first taste of what Vivian considered clarification. The certified mail truck came rumbling down my gravel road at 7 in the morning, its engine coughing like an old man with too many cigarettes. The driver handed me an envelope so thick it could have stopped a bullet, and I could already smell trouble brewing stronger than my morning coffee. Inside was a formal lien notice against my property. Notice of intent to foreclose. The letterhead screamed in bold red letters. Vivian was using Texas Property Code Section 209-006, something called HOA Superlien Authority, to claim my ranch as collateral for her made-up debt. I had 30 days to pay the full $88,000 where she'd start foreclosure proceedings. Now I've dealt with my share of bureaucratic nonsense over the years, but this was like watching someone try to steal your truck with a crayon drawing of the title. The audacity was almost impressive. My first stop was the county courthouse, where I spent 3 days buried in records that smelled like old paper and broken dreams. What I found made me madder than a hornet in a honey jar. The original ranch property predated the subdivision by 30 years. Clarence's land had been there since 1987, while Meadowbrook Estates was barely 5 years old. That's when I remembered something from a legal dispute I dealt with years ago on a construction project. The old-timer lawyer had told me about adverse possession. When property has been used continuously for a specific purpose for decades, you can't just retroactively slap new rules on it without proper legal notice. I made a mental note that anyone facing similar situations should research how long their property has been used for its current purpose before letting anyone change the rules. I spent another day photographing every original survey from 1987 and comparing them to the 2018 HOA boundary maps. Armed with this ammunition, I figured Vivian would back down once she realized her legal position was weaker than gas station coffee. I was wrong. Instead of retreating, she went nuclear. Within a week, I started getting phone calls from potential contracting clients asking if it was true that I didn't honor my legal obligations. 2 jobs I'd been counting on suddenly disappeared. But here's where Vivian made her first big mistake. When she started her whisper campaign at my daughter's school, she forgot one crucial detail. Small-town parents talk to each other, and they don't like bullies. My counterpunch was strategic. While she was busy spreading rumors, I was quietly building a legal fortress. I called property attorney Sarah Brennan. $300 an hour. That hurt my wallet, but opened my eyes. I also started documenting every single interaction with the HOA because I had a feeling I was going to need evidence later. Rex, Sarah said after reviewing my documents, the leather of her office chair creaking as she leaned back. You're sitting on a gold mine. This HOA overstepped their authority so badly they might as well have robbed a bank in broad daylight. She confirmed what I'd suspected about the adverse possession angle and mentioned something every property buyer should know. You can always request all HOA documents before closing. It's legally required in most states. If they can't provide them, that's your first red flag. But the real game share came when I reached out to Bobby Chun and Maria Santos, my neighboring ranchers dealing with similar pressure. Instead of fighting this battle alone, I was building an army. That's when Bobby dropped the bombshell that shifted the entire battlefield. Rex, he said over coffee, the steam rising from our mugs like morning fog over his pasture. This ain't about community standards. They expanded their boundaries specifically to include ranch properties. They need our fees to fund their $2.3 million community center project. He showed me meeting minutes from a public records request. The HOA was broke. Their grandiose plans had exceeded budget by 40%, and they were facing a special assessment that would cost each existing member over $10,000 unless they could suddenly discover 12 ranch properties owing years of back dues. The math was beautiful in its corruption. 12 ranches times 80,000 equals nearly $1 million. Just enough to save their community center and Vivian's political reputation. And here's the kicker. Vivian's husband sat on the county planning commission that had approved the boundary expansion. I smiled for the first time in weeks because I'd just figured out how to turn Vivian's greed into her downfall. She thought she was playing chess, but I was about to flip the board. Vivian's next move proved she was either desperate or stupid, probably both. 3 days after my meeting with Sarah, I got a call from Pinnacle Recovery Services, One of those bottom feeder collection agencies that make their money terrorizing people who can't fight back. The woman on the phone had a voice like gravel in a blender and about as much charm. Mr. Dalton, this is regarding your delinquent HOA account. We're prepared to garnish wages and seize assets if this matter isn't resolved within 72 hours. I almost laughed. Ma'am, you might want to check your legal standing before you threaten someone. This debt is disputed and your client knows it. The harassment escalated quickly. Daily phone calls during dinner, automated messages about my legal obligations, and they even had the audacity to show up at one of my job sites, embarrassing me in front of a client who could smell the desperation on them like cheap cologne. That's when Vivian made her second big mistake. She decided to take her campaign public. The monthly HOA meeting was held in their fancy community center, the one they apparently needed my money to finish paying for. Vivian called a special session to discuss delinquent accounts, and according to Maria Santos, who attended as a guest, it was quite a performance. She had a whole PowerPoint about you, Maria told me later. Pictures of your property, claiming you were running an illegal business, saying you were destroying property values. Then she posted it all on Nextdoor. I pulled up the post on my phone. There was my ranch photograph from the road, with a caption about deadbeat neighbors who refused to contribute. The comments section had become a digital battlefield. Now I've learned something over the years about fighting bullies. Sometimes you have to let them think they're winning while you prepare your knockout punch. So instead of getting mad, I got methodical. I remembered something from a city council dispute I'd worked on. These HOAs operate like mini governments, which means they have to follow transparency rules. I filed a formal public records request demanding 3 years of financial documents, because any homeowner has the right to see where their money goes. The smell of fresh ink and photocopy or toner filled my kitchen as I spread boxes of documents across my table. What I found was better than Christmas morning for someone who loves catching thieves. $40,000 in consulting fees to Harwick Properties, Vivian's own company. Another $30,000 to Santos Landscaping, which took me 5 minutes on Google to discover was owned by her brother-in-law. The community center had somehow grown from $1.8 million to $2.3 million with zero competitive bidding records. But the real smoking gun was buried in board meeting minutes. 3 months ago, Vivian had proposed a special assessment of $12,000 per household to cover overruns. The motion failed when homeowners threatened to recall the entire board. 2 weeks later, they mysteriously discovered that ranch properties owed back dues. While I was building my financial case, Vivian was busy making hers worse. She started photographing violations throughout the neighborhood, but only targeting people who defended me. A mailbox supposedly. The wrong beige grass allegedly 3/4 and too tall. The irony was delicious. Her own house had a hot tub violating setback requirements, and her lawn showed signs of commercial irrigation during water restrictions. I started my own documentation project because two could play the rules game. I also filed a complaint with the state attorney general since HOA board members have fiduciary duty. They're legally required to act in the community's interest, not line their own pockets. My weekly coffee meetings had grown from 3 ranchers to 12 families, and word was spreading. Parents at Sage's school started asking questions. Local business owners began choosing sides. The community was waking up to what Vivian really was. Her response was predictable, a cease and desist letter demanding I stop harassing board members by asking about their financial decisions. Her attorney, probably costing more per hour than I made in a week, threatened legal action for my campaign of intimidation. I had Sarah draft a response that was basically a legal way of saying, bring it on, because by then I'd realized something important. Vivian wasn't just corrupt. She was cornered and desperate. People make the biggest mistakes. I could practically hear the trap snapping shut. She just didn't know it yet. If I thought Vivian was desperate before I was about to learn what real desperation looked like. It started with boot prints in the frost. I woke up one Wednesday morning to find fresh footprints circling my barn, leading right up to the windows where someone had clearly been peering inside. The grass was still stiff with morning cold, and whoever had been snooping around had left a trail clear as day, including cigarette butts that definitely weren't mine. I grabbed my camera and documented everything, because by now, I'd learned that with Vivian, Today's trespassing was tomorrow's evidence. The boot prints led to tire tracks by my back fence where someone had parked and walked onto my property in the dead of night. 2 days later, I got a call from the electric company claiming I was running a commercial operation without proper permits. According to their anonymous tip, I was operating heavy machinery and needed to upgrade to industrial service at about 4 times the cost.